The digital world just witnessed a quiet, undeniable seismic shift, and most people missed the tremor. The core business model of the world's most powerful social media company, Meta, was just forced into a radical structural compliance change by the US Federal Trade Commission. This isn't just a regulatory fine, it's a forced surgical procedure on the engine of the attention economy. An intervention so deep, it has the potential to influence how information is structured and consumed across every continent. The news on its surface is dry, a legal settlement over children's privacy violations. But the mechanism behind the headline is the true story. At stake is the fundamental economic principle that underpins the entire trillion-dollar digital ecosystem, the unrestricted commodification of attention and data, often known as predictive behavioral value. This ruling, however, requires a crucial pattern interrupt in that value chain, forcing Meta to fundamentally re-engineer how it collects and processes certain types of user data by requiring explicit opt-in consent for new services. This introduces friction where there was once frictionless default extraction. The surprising fact here is not the penalty, but the unprecedented reach of the remedy. This compliance agreement establishes an independent internal monitoring structure for 20 years, an organizational shadow government designed to ensure the spirit of the law, not just the letter, is followed. This echoes historic moments where the US government established oversight that restructured entire American industries. For the regular user, this matters because it's an attack on the black box that shapes modern reality. Behavioral economics tells us people rarely act against convenience, which is why default settings, like automatic data collection, are so powerful. This ruling begins to chip away at the assumption of implied consent, setting a new, higher standard of digital fiduciary responsibility for the platform. This structural change in the US market is already sending ripples across the globe, creating a compliance precedent that international regulators cannot ignore, implicitly establishing a new floor for data rights that is colliding with aggressive regulations in Europe and elsewhere. The deepest truth of the Meta compliance order isn't in the legal jargon, it's in the quiet subversion of the platform's core economic physics. The US regulator targeted the precise mechanism of algorithmic opacity, the system's deliberate vagueness about how it collects and uses data to serve personalized content. The underlying system being challenged here is the technological architecture of digital rent-seeking, where platforms extract disproportionate value, or rent, from every interaction by monetizing the context and prediction of the user's behavior. The settlement introduces a critical point of friction, requiring the company to establish a comprehensive privacy program and restricting the deployment of data on new products without specific consent. Psychologically, this forces the platform to treat data not as an endless, free resource, but as a limited, consented asset. The long-term nature of the remedy, audits and compliance reviews for 2 decades, is the unexpected angle. This is not a punishment. It is a forced institutional redesign, suggesting a growing international consensus that massive digital platforms are not just private enterprises, but critical public utilities that require continuous regulatory maintenance. This affects the regular consumer through the lens of pre-commitment theory in behavioral economics. When a person must actively and consciously click, "I agree," they form a stronger pre-commitment than if they simply accept a default setting. The Meta order raises the cognitive hurdle for data sharing, reducing the platform's ability to capitalize on the user's cognitive laziness. This forces the platform to innovate on utility, rather than just extraction. The new product must be so genuinely useful that the user wants to grant consent, shifting the focus from maximizing data to maximizing value. Other countries and markets view this development through the lens of regulatory arbitrage and technological sovereignty. The EU has consistently taken the lead in imposing structural demands on big tech, the Brussels effect, but the US order offers a powerful, domestically driven alternative. It shows that even without a massive legislative overhaul, a dedicated US regulator can use existing enforcement powers to impose deep structural change. This creates a fascinating psychological dynamic, a race to the top for the world's most effective digital governance model. The historical parallel that illuminates this is the rise of the Bretton Woods system post-WW2. Today, we are seeing the emergence of a digital Bretton Woods, where regulatory powers vie to set the operating standards for the Internet. The surprising mechanism is the cross-jurisdictional influence of this specific US remedy. By requiring Meta to implement systemic, auditable privacy controls across its entire enterprise, the US is essentially forcing the company to build a better global privacy infrastructure. It becomes difficult for Meta to maintain a high compliance system for the US and a low compliance system elsewhere, creating a powerful, unintended export of American regulatory standards. For global citizens, this translates into a powerful behavioral insight: the power of institutional inertia. When a mandatory, long-term structural overhaul is imposed in a key market like the US, the path of least resistance for the corporation is often to apply the highest standard globally. This is an institutional response to the consumer's growing data fatigue and distrust. While the world watches the financial and legal drama, the most profound outcome of the Meta compliance shift is the immediate impact on the invisible infrastructure of work, information, and capital. This mandate is not about a fine, it's about a forced reallocation of digital talent and a reprioritization of corporate spending. The mandate immediately creates a demand shock for a specific type of worker: the privacy engineer, the compliance architect, and the ethically aligned AI developer. Instead of funneling capital solely into maximizing ad targeting efficiency, Meta must now divert massive resources into building and maintaining the 20-year compliance structure. This is a subtle but powerful market correction that shifts the value proposition within the technology sector, revaluing the worker who can secure and respect data over the worker who can simply monetize it. The part the media isn't discussing is the long-term impact on small businesses and independent content creators. When platforms are forced to reduce their reliance on hyper-precise personal targeting, advertising becomes less efficient, which historically forces a pivot from invasive behavioral targeting back toward contextual advertising: ads based on the content of the page, not the identity of the user. This shift levels the playing field, making advertising less dependent on massive, expensive data science operations and more dependent on creativity, utility, and good content. The structural shift forces the entire digital ecosystem to respond to the consumer's growing distrust. By creating a higher barrier to data extraction, it restores a tiny measure of cognitive control to the user, making the digital experience marginally less extractive and more trustworthy in the long run. The US government's quiet move against Meta is more than a policy decision. It is a profound act of economic reengineering that redraws the line between private profit and public good in the digital domain. Because while the world is focused on this, the real transformation in digital regulation, the one that will define the next decade of geopolitical power, is already unfolding quietly and in a place no one expects: the global battle for control over the underlying AI models themselves.